On this edition of the NESN College Hockey Podcast, we'll give you our 3 stars of the week in Hockey East, we'll defend BC head coach Jerry York, and we'll speak with Merrimack head coach Scott Borek. Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of the NESN College Hockey Podcast. I'm Dakota Randall, alongside always Pat McAvoy. Pat, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here today. Big week in hockey, and I'm excited to get into it today. I think we got some crazy stuff to talk about.
Cool, yeah. Listen, we got a lot to get to. Big week, strange week. Someone said something really stupid about Jerry York, who now is in the Hockey Hall of Fame. BU head coach Albie O'Connell has been suspended, and of course, there were a lot of notable games. Many notable results. We also have an interview with Merrimack head coach Scott Borek. Pat, you did that. Ahead of his team's game or weekend series with UMass. So you'll be able to see that game on NESN. And real quick, I want to give you the NESN schedule for this weekend. Friday, we have Merrimack at UMass at 7 on NESN. Maine at Northeastern at 7 on NESN Plus. Saturday, Vermont at BU at 4 on NESN. Maine at Northeastern at 7 p.m. on NESN Plus. And then Sunday, women's hockey, Maine at Northeastern at 2. That game can be seen on NESN. And remember, all of our hockey's coverage is brought to you by Rockland Trust, where each relationship matters. And listen, we'll get into all the games in a bit, all the future games, all the games over the weekend. We'll get into some of the bigger storylines. But as always, I want to start with our 3 stars of the week in Hockey East. I'll start first. I'm going to go with Wyatt Newpower out of Uconn. He had 3 points as the Huskies themselves took 3 points from UMass Lowell, who of course is a great team. Uconn has struggled a bit this year. UMass, one of the better teams in Hockey East. So Newpower had 3 points. He had 2 assists in the first game, which was a 3-3 tie. Then he scored the first goal of a 2-1 victory the next night. Again, it was a big weekend for Uconn, and he was a big part of it. So yeah, number 1 star goes to Wyatt Newpower. Probably the first time we've talked about him all season, and deservedly so. He had a big weekend. So,
for our next star this week, goaltender from BC, Spencer Knight. Spencer Knight had a big weekend for the Eagles. He stopped 61 of 62 shots in the Eagles' 2-game sweep over Vermont. He had a 94.8 save percentage, and in reality, it was just a great weekend for him. I know a couple weeks ago, I think it was on the first episode of the podcast I was on, I said that this was in the middle of their 4-game losing streak. I said that it looked like he was kind of struggling a little bit.
Right.
And it appears he's taking a step in the right direction, and he's back. And he's playing fantastic right now.
Yeah, I mean, stopping 61 of 62 shots kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And the Eagles are now on a 5-game winning streak. So yeah, great play out of Spencer Knight. Eagles kind of surging again after they were down for a little bit. So yeah, deserved number 2 star. And for me, number 3 star, Mitch Fossier from Maine. We obviously had our interview with Mitch last week. Really interesting guy, multi-talented, really bright guy, great singer, musician, all that stuff, but also very good hockey player. And not the most flashy stats, but he had 3 points on the weekend against UNH as Maine swept UNH. We'll get into that in a little bit. He assisted on the go-ahead goal Friday night and had the overtime winner the next night. He also broke the 100-point mark for his career. So again, just 3 points, nothing crazy, but they were important points in those 2 games. And what was a very, I feel, important, 2-game sweep for Maine. So I just thought Mitch Fossier once again leading the charge for Maine, probably Black Bears' best overall player this season. So again, those are our 3 stars of the week. Now I want to get into the games, the results, the storylines, and I'm going to start with that Maine UNH series. We talked about this going into it, kind of a statement opportunity for both programs. Also, just a big rivalry game. There's really not a rivalry in Hockey East that's better than Maine UNH. I mean, some may be on their level on a national scale. I'm sure there are other teams that have great rivalries, but UNH and Maine go way back. So those 2 games already had a ton of juice. Orono, they really showed up to Alphon Arena for these 2 games, and Maine did really well. The Black Bears now are 7-3-2, good for 3rd in Hockey East, while UNH drops to 5-4-1 and they're tied for 7th. Maine won the first game 3-1. They kind of commanded that one throughout. But the second game, UNH led, and I watched that game. UNH led until the final minute, and it was a 1-0 Wildcats lead for, I forget when they took the lead, but regardless, UNH played really well. They controlled the tempo for much of the game, and then in the third period, in the final minute, I forget who went to the box. I think it was Cruikshank, Agnes Cruikshank. Regardless, Maine scored. I think they also had they pulled the goalie and had the extra attacker on. Regardless, Fossier assisted on the goal that tied it, and send it into overtime, where Maine eventually won. And I don't think it was necessarily about UNH losing those two games, because I thought the Wildcats looked good, but just the fact that Maine swept those two games was very important for them. And they didn't make it into the polls this week. We'll get into the polls, but they're right on the edge. They got the most votes of anybody who didn't make it in. And I think we're at the point now with Maine where we can say they are for real. I mean, it's still a little early, but I'm confident in saying that I think Maine is a legitimate threat in Hockey East, and I think they showed it this weekend. So yeah, good weekend for the Black Bears.
Another series that we touched upon last week, we thought it was going to be a big one, and it kind of lived up to the hype, was BU versus UMass.
And this game also has this, along with BC Vermont, has an important sidebar that we'll get to. But first, I want you to get into the actual, nuts and bolts of these two games.
Absolutely. And so this was a matchup that we talked about last week, that there could potentially be an upset.
We called it.
And there was.
We called it, okay.
Game one in Boston, BU scored the first four goals of the game, starting with Matthew Corsa getting the Terriers on the board just 7 minutes into the game. UMass had a late push. They put 3 in the third period, but they just couldn't get that fourth one. And so BU knocked off UMass. But then the Minutemen were able to get back and maybe a slight step in the right direction on Saturday. They won 4-1. Mitchell Chaffee was huge for UMass. He scored his first of 2 with under 2 minutes left in the first period. He scored 2 goals on the night. And overall, he had 3 points with an assist in the game on Friday. But so UMass, they went from number 2 in the country. They were 5, and now they've dropped down to 7. Who knows what we're going to see out of them this week against Merrimack, and we'll get into that a little later. But a big weekend for BU.
Yeah, a big weekend for BU, at least in the first game. Mm-hmm. But again, I think just the fact that they split with UMass, I think was a great sign. And I'm not really worried about UMass. They're such a great team. Every team kind of scuffles a little bit, especially in Hockey East. But yeah, the story coming out of the series was after the 4-1 loss Saturday night for BU, Terriers head coach Albie O'Connell. Listen, there's really not much information out there. There's some chatter on Twitter that he yelled at somebody. There was talk of throwing a pen. I don't know. I don't think there's enough information out there for us to really say anything with any certainty. What is certain, however, is that he's been suspended, I believe, for 1 game. I don't have it right in front of me. I think it's just for 1 game. But regardless, he was suspended by Hockey East for his behavior following the game. He eventually apologized, which is kind of a little mysterious. I just don't really know too much about it. But regardless, I mean, he was clearly frustrated with the effort that his team put out. Maybe there was something with the officials. I'm not sure. Regardless, he wasn't happy after the Terriers lost that game 4-1. Because and I could partially understand it. I mean, they got that big win 4-3 in the first night, and then to kind of come out the next night and
absolutely
and kind of lose that game. I'm sure it was frustrating. But yeah, so Albie O'Connell has been suspended. If we get more information on that, we'll talk about it and sort of offer our thoughts and give our analysis. But right now, there really just is none. So I don't want to speculate too much, because all I know is it's behavior after the game, and that is incredibly broad. But nonetheless, I think it's worth bringing up. As is the story that came out of the BC series with Vermont. We'll get to that in just a second, but I know you have some thoughts on the Eagles' sweep of the Catamounts.
The same way that you just kind of described Maine as you're sold on them now, I am sold on BC. We talked about them a couple weeks ago. They were scuttling. They lost 4 straight, but they've responded with 5 straight wins, and over that stretch, they've outscored opponents 22-4. I think it's pretty cut and dry to say right now that BC is back to being the BC that you expect to see on the ice. On the weekend, like we already talked about, they swept Vermont. Senior forward David Cotton, he kind of continued his recent solid stretch. He had 4 points on the weekend with a goal and 3 assists.
He could have easily been one of the 3 stars, but
Absolutely.
A little recency bias, I gave it to Mitch Fossey because he's a friend of the program.
Absolutely, so. And I'm glad that we did do that. And then freshman forward Alex Newhook also continued his recent hot streak with 2 points on the weekend with a goal and assist. But all in all, the biggest story out of this weekend is BC is finding the back of the net like crazy right now, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, neither do I. Again, you can make a case that they're the most talented team in the country when they're right, and so I kind of suspect as the year goes on and they get more comfortable with each other, they'll sort of find their stride and they'll really show it. And yeah, they won 5 in a row. They're up to number 14 in the polls. So I think, the Eagles are back. They're playing great. But yeah, I think the bigger story that came out of this one, and something that became more of a national story, Steve Simmons a columnist for the Toronto Sun, I believe, a hockey writer. So Jerry York, legendary coach for Boston College, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame on Monday. However, on Friday, there was a ceremony in Toronto, sort of preceding the whole induction ceremony on Monday. So Friday, I believe they were all supposed to get their rings. It's sort of a tradition where the class that's going into the Hockey Hall of Fame gets their rings, and they go. The people that were there, the inductees that were there, also went to the Bruins Maple Leafs game, were on the ice, dropped the puck. So there's some sort of pomp and circumstance that they do. And Jerry York, in I guess a move that is just not, that Steve Simmons does not think was very cool, decided to coach his team that night instead. He honored his commitment to his team and coached BC and Vermont on Friday night. He did, Burlington is, I don't know how far it is from Toronto, but it sure ain't close. So it's not like, one, it was a far trip, and two, he has a commitment to his team.
Absolutely.
But regardless, Steve Simmons took issue with it. And here's the initial quote. He said, "What an idiotic decision by Jerry York to pass on the day's festivities at the Hockey Hall of Fame so he could coach yet another U.S. college game. God forbid that the coach coaches his team. That's my view. You can disagree." Well, many people did disagree, and by many, I mean everybody disagreed. And then eventually he sort of walked it back, and he said, "I would change the word idiotic to disrespectful." I disagree with both, so I don't know what he's trying to accomplish there. He said, "It is Hall of Fame weekend. If Jerry York didn't want to take part in the numerous events prior to Monday night, he should have declined the honor." And then he went on to ask some other Twitter person if they would have gone back on there. I don't know. Regardless, two very stupid quotes from Steve Simmons. I don't think I've seen anything Jerry York has said about it. But regardless, I think comments kind of speak for itself. I don't know if you have a take on it. I mean, they're pretty stupid, and I just don't understand the guy recruited these players and with the idea that, listen, I'm your coach, I'm committed to you, I'm going to do everything I can to, one, help you win in college, two, help you get to the next level. A lot of these players have been drafted and so on. And what does it say if Jerry York says, guys, listen, you're on your own on this one. It's the assistant coach is going to lead you because I'm going to go get a ring in Toronto.
Absolutely.
Especially when, the Eagles entered the weekend series with Vermont having won 3 in a row. But regardless, this is a team that's still trying to find its identity, which isn't really a great time for the coach to leave.
So I'm not going to be able to toss many different things out than you because my opinion is 100% online with yours. Jerry York, he did what he's going into the Hall of Fame for. He's specifically going in because of what he's been able to do for the BC program all these years. And also, a ceremony to get a ring, that's all great and all, but I'm sure Jerry York probably preferred to coach his team because that's what he's done for so long.
That's why he's in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I've spoken to Jerry York on one occasion last year at the Bean Pot, and he's a great guy. He's a nice guy. I'm sure that he saw those comments and probably paid him no mind because he probably doesn't care that this reporter, said this because he did what he prefers to do, what he likes to do, and now he still was able to go to the ceremony on Monday. So best of both worlds, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Good for Jerry York. Congratulations to you, and good luck the rest of the way.
Yeah, the bigger story, I guess, or really above all else, congratulations to Jerry York for being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Well deserved. Probably the best college hockey coach of all time. So again, well deserved. And yeah, the guy that Steve Simmons calling him out, just kind of a buffoon. So we'll leave it at that. A couple more games I want to get into. North Dakota ties and beats Denver. North Dakota moves up to 5th in the country while Denver drops to 4th. Denver now 0-2-2 in its last 4 games. Granted, against good competition, they lost and tied to Minnesota Duluth, and then of course just lost and tied to North Dakota. So I don't know if it really says much about Denver, but I think it's for North Dakota. It kind of reminds people how good of a program they really have up there. So again, they're up to number 5 in the country. We'll get to the polls in a second. Just want to run through some other games real quick. American International, the darlings of Western Massachusetts, they won 12-0 Friday night against Mercyhurst, and then responded the next night by losing 4-3 in overtime. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you win 12-0 one night and then lose in overtime the next night. It kind of must erase whatever good vibes you had off of the 12-0 win.
That bus ride must not have been too fun.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. Alaska Fairbanks sweeps Northern Michigan. both two good teams. I think Northern Michigan somewhere in the bottom 20. Alaska Fairbanks always on the edge of making the polls. They have a good program. I think it was a good weekend. Good statement for them. Nebraska Omaha splits with Western Michigan. Again, two good teams that are kind of at the bottom of the top 20. But I think it was just sort of both programs showing how good they really are. Notre Dame and Wisconsin split, two great teams. Not really surprised that there was a split. Penn State sweeps Minnesota. We've kind of been wondering, are Penn State really as good as their record and their standing in the polls? And I think now we can say that they are. Minnesota Duluth, the two-time defending national champions. A team many still believe probably is the best team in the country. They lose to Miami, Ohio, and then earn a 3-2 win the next night, which is they should blow out Miami, Ohio. So losing and then just squeaking out a win. Just looking for more consistency from Minnesota Duluth. They're all the way down to number 9, so I'm just kind of wondering what's going on. So real quick, before we get into our interview and everything, I just want to get into the polls, as we always do. Number 1, Minnesota State. No surprise. They're great. Number 2, Cornell, then Notre Dame, Denver, North Dakota, Penn State, UMass, Clarkson, Minnesota Duluth, Harvard, Ohio State, number 12, Providence, then Northeastern, Boston College, UMass Lowell, Wisconsin, Bowling Green, Omaha, Northern Michigan, and Western Michigan. The teams picking up votes: Maine, Quinnipiac, Arizona State, Alaska, RIT, Dartmouth, Colorado College, UNH, and Robert Morris. You have any takeaways from the polls, Pat? Not too much reshuffling.
So, yeah, just to go off that. So one thing about this week is, unlike in the last 2 weeks specifically, there really wasn't much shuffling. The biggest drops of the week were around 2 to 3. One thing I noticed was, Minnesota Duluth, they dropped from 6 to 9 on the week. UMass dropped from 5 to 7. So nothing too crazy. Denver also fell from 2 to 4. So nothing really bigger than 2 or 3, which was honestly a little bit surprising, especially with UMass the last 2 weeks. I thought maybe they'd go a little lower.
Right.
But then on the other side, there weren't many risers either. The biggest one of the week probably was North Dakota, rising from 9 to 5 after their win over Denver. And
My namesake.
So that's a great win for that program. And then another one I noticed that was a big one of the week was Harvard moving up from 13 to 10. We talked about them a little bit last week about how they were undefeated at 3-0. So that's great, but we weren't sure what to expect out of them. They showed up with 2 more huge wins, 4-1 and 6-1 over Brown and Yale, respectively. So
we kind of talked maybe upset for Brown, but we
thought that would happen, and they just continued to find the back of the net. So that was probably the biggest riser of the week, aside from North Dakota, but nothing too crazy this week.
Yeah, no, nothing too crazy. I do agree. Harvard, interesting there, 5-0 up to number 10. Definitely going to be looking to see what the Crimson do from here on out. Okay, so now let's get to our interview.
Yep.
And really, I'll kind of give the floor to you on this, Pat. You spoke to Merrimack head coach Scott Borek ahead of his team's game series this weekend with UMass.
Yep.
Listen, Merrimack 2-7-1. Not a great start to the season, but they're coming off a 2-week break after a decent showing against Northeastern that we talked about last week.
Yep.
With the tie. So a tough start to the season, but I think there's some reason for optimism in Merrimack based on how they played against Northeastern.
Absolutely.
You spoke to Coach Borek, Pat. What are just some of your initial sort of takeaways before we get into the interview?
It kind of goes into what you were just saying a little bit. So one thing that I found super interesting about talking to Coach Borek was learning more about their season aside from just the numbers and then catching the occasional game that I've been able to see on NESN or at the rink. But so they came in with 16 freshmen this year, and so that's one thing that we spoke a lot about was how young the team is, and a lot of the players are from all around the country. So you have 16 new faces from all over the place trying to get them on the same page with the upperclassmen as well. And so it's interesting hearing his take on how it's going so far and what he expects from these guys moving forward. And so although the record might not be exactly where they'd want it to be at the moment, like you mentioned, I think there is some room for optimism. Coach Borek also sees it that way. And so let's get into the interview and hear what he has to say.
All right, yeah. So without any further ado, here is Merrimack head coach Scott Borek.
I'm here with Merrimack College head coach Scott Borek. How are you doing today, Coach?
Very well, thank you.
So just to get started, so sitting at 2-7-1 so far this season, but you guys are coming off of a couple of strong performances against Northeastern and Uconn. How would you describe your team's performance so far this season?
It's been a little up and down, which is not surprising given our youth, but I've been really pleased with our effort, and I think we've gotten better each day. So it's been positive. I think it's not something we were surprised by. There were days when you have as many new faces as we do, there were days we looked really, really good, and there were days we looked equally as disappointing. But those days are minimizing for sure, and we're playing a lot better right now.
Love that. I'm glad to hear. And so to kind of lead into my next question, I actually touched upon it a little bit, but so entering the season, you lost a lot of players and made up for it with 16 freshmen. How is it coaching such a young group? How do you keep the morale up? How do you get the chemistry going? How is it with so many young guys?
The interesting thing now is because of the summer semester before they get here, we were able to utilize that where almost all those freshmen except for one were here. It was a great time for them to get to know each other, get to know the school. A lot of their teammates or future teammates came by to be part of it as well, which was really helpful. So we made that the priority of the summer was let's become a group so we don't need to do that in the fall. And I think that worked really, really well. And then, you get into the fall, and obviously now all of a sudden lineup decisions are being made, lines are being created, and that's another hurdle for young players to get over, and the daily disappointments or the daily excitements. And so I think that we're maturing as a group in that regard. And I've really liked, we've played most. It's not like we have 16 new freshmen and they're watching. I mean, most of them have played, if not some, significant. So that has certainly helped. And I think what we need to do now is just continue to grow. I mean, we're going to have some disappointing times, and the hardest thing is going to be getting through those disappointing times. But I think we can, and I think our team's mature enough now to grow even during those disappointments.
Absolutely. And so to kind of lead into this next weekend, so you had this past weekend off, but now this upcoming weekend you have a home against UMass. UMass is struggling of late, losing 2 of their last 3. But what would you say your team's biggest strength is entering this game, or these 2 games, I mean?
Well, I'm watching film on UMass. I don't feel like they're struggling very much. But, we just need to keep pace. I mean, I think one thing that UMass does really, really well, and particularly in their rink, which is where the first game is, obviously, and the hardest thing for us would be transitioning at the same pace that they transition at right now. I think they play a really good transition game, both offensively and defensively. They're always moving and they're always hunting pucks. They're going to lift our pace for sure that we've seen recently, because they play really hard on both sides of it. I'm excited because I think we'll get better from the series. I think we'll get better from each game because we, sometimes teams play really good on one side of the puck and not so good on the other, but that's a team that has had a lot of success recently and has had it based upon that effort. And so they're going to make our effort, they're going to force us to raise our level of play, which I'm excited to see. I hope we bring it immediately, but, either way, it's going to be growth for us.
Absolutely, and that's all you can ask for. So to kind of go back to the roster now, so we've touched upon the young guys a little bit, but so all in all, the roster as a whole is very diverse with players coming from Sweden, Finland, Canada, and all across the United States. So as you're preparing for the season and getting ready, so how do you go about coaching such a diverse group and getting everybody on the same page with the same goal in mind?
Well, I think ultimately, that would on the outside may seem like a difficult challenge to bring a lot of different cultures and groups into the room. I think it makes the room more interesting. Each guy, our Finnish goaltender approaches his challenges and his success is much different than the young man from Waltham, Mass, right? So that's made it interesting. But they all ultimately have the same goal, and that's to succeed at this level and succeed for Merrimack. So I think that, that piece of it, the kids have bought into the school really well, and we're all pulling on the same rope, which is a great thing. And then the diversity they bring into the room makes it a really interesting room. And it's been fun. It's fun to walk into that room every day because I know I'm going to have guys who are excited about the day, who, understand that winning today is the only thing that matters. And really, we've been able to really work on a strong team culture, which has been fun. And I think that our players have bought into it really well. And it's been a lot of fun. I didn't know what to expect having this many young guys and new guys, but I've really enjoyed it. I think our coaching staff has really enjoyed it, and I think we have a really good room right now, and I'm excited moving forward.
It sounds like it's a good time over there at Merrimack. So then to go back now to just the age of the team. So this season you have 3 freshman goaltenders. How have you kind of gone about the playing time, but also how would you rate the way that they've responded and played so far this season?
Well, we've definitely had some ups and downs. I mean, the further you go back, closer to your net you get, the harder it is to be a freshman in those situations. And so we've had these 3 freshman goaltenders, and they've played behind 5 freshman defensemen almost every single night. And that's problematic. I mean, it's one thing having a freshman goaltender with a really experienced defense. UMass did that last year, and they had a really experienced defense. For us, it's different because we have the 5 freshmen playing with the freshman goaltenders. So that's been a challenge. I've worked really hard to make sure they haven't lost their confidence because we've made some glaring mistakes that have ended up in the back of our net, which had nothing to do with the goalie. And we try to approach the goaltending position as if it's a position of 6. Everybody has to contribute to that, and there are times we've really mishandled it. We played Wisconsin and lost in a really ugly game, but we gave up just unbelievable shots. And some people would look at it as a goaltending because we played all 3 and say that we really struggled in the net, and I think we did, but it wasn't because of our goalies. It was just as much because of our forwards and our defense just hanging our goalies out to dry. So we try to make sure that we get a lot of work with them in practice and make sure that they understand their role in the team for that particular game or for that particular weekend. And you have to. I think it's really hard for a second and third string goalie. You have to make everybody feel important and valued. And
absolutely,
we try to spend a lot of time making sure that each of those guys, whether you're playing or not, feels that they're valued.
Absolutely. And so now to kind of transition into the coaching side of it. So prior to the season, longtime Plattsburgh State coach Bob Emery was brought into the fold. He's 5th all-time in college hockey wins, regardless of division. So my question to you is: what do you feel he's added to the program so far this season?
Oh, it's hard to pinpoint it as one thing. I mean, the level of experience that he brings into our room on a daily basis, into the coaches' room. He has no coaching. Because of the NCAA rules, he's not allowed to coach our players, but he does coach our coaches, and it's been really productive. So for me personally, through any challenge we've had, he has already been through that at least once. So we can talk about things from a position of experience, where oftentimes your assistant coaches can't have that same experience. It just isn't on their resume yet. So having him being as experienced as he is, funny word to use for a guy, but really mature about his approach to the locker room and the team, has really been helpful. And every day we've had some really good moments, and then we've had probably more disappointing moments this year so far. And he's helped us get through each of those equally, try to keep an equilibrium about our program and about our team and our focus on the next day and the future. And that's really where it needs to be. So he's been invaluable. I think it is unfortunate that we can't use him as a coach because he'd be a great addition in that regard as well. But he's been a great addition as a leader in our program and someone who's contributing. And it's not lost on the players. I'm sure that the guy who's organizing their meals has been a head coach for 31 years and is selfless like that and has zero ego in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's a great example for our players to see, be an all-star at your role, and that's what Bob does every day, and I think the players see that, and I think that helps them get through the next day and try to get better the next day.
Love that. And so now this is your second year as the head coach of Merrimack. So how do you feel it has differed from year 1 to year 2?
Well, year 1 I didn't know the players very well. I obviously arrived to that team and really had a world of respect for the group. I mean, we had a great group of kids, worked their tail off, did everything we asked. I thought they really started to change kind of the perspective of the program and the focus of the program. They'd been here long enough that they hadn't had much success, and I think that when you don't have a lot of success, it's easy to say, oh, whoa, we're just Merrimack. But you don't get extra credit for being the smallest school in the league or the weakest program in the league. You get the opposite. So I thought they did a real good job of kind of turning the focus on the fact that we don't want to have moral victories. We want to chase victories, real ones. And when we lose, it hurts, and when we win, it feels great. And we move forward from both of those things with the same attitude. And I couldn't say enough about the team we had last year. I loved the guys. We had a lot of transition, which was really difficult, but I felt like it had to happen for our program to move forward. But I really cared for every person on that team, and I think every one of them, whether they played one game or 30 full last year, contributed to moving us in a good direction that has set a foundation that it's now these freshmen' responsibility to move forward. And I take that very seriously. The sacrifices those guys made, the difficult discussions they had to go through, it's up to our new players now to carry that effort and that sacrifice forward. So it's different this year just because we're new and 16 guys that haven't worn the sweater, so they don't know what has happened at Merrimack before or when or since. They know recent history, but I certainly remind them of the great teams that Coach Denny had here not too long ago. And why can't we do that? They were able to do it. That should be us, and let's do it consistently. So, that's a long answer, but that's kind of how I've approached it since I've been here. And I couldn't say enough about last year's team, and it set the basis for this year's team to move forward.
Absolutely. And that's my final question. So let's go back to the roster now. So we've already touched upon it. You have a wide mix of young guys and then a few upperclassmen returners. So what are your goals for the rest of the season and then beyond, looking forward into, let's say, next season?
Well, I'd like us to be continue to grow as a team this year, to try to make a playoff run, to get ourselves in a position to be competing in January and February, to make it into the playoffs, and that would be our goal this year. Certainly, that's the goal of the program every year, but that's what it is this year right now. And then moving forward, I'd like to come back into next fall, feeling like we have 16 juniors, not 16 sophomores. That they were able to grow from that experience so much this year, and that their maturity level is high and their commitment level is high, and that they're ready to take the next step with the program, wherever that may be.
Absolutely. Sounds like Merrimack's got a bright future. I want to say thank you again for coming on to the podcast today, and good luck this weekend against UMass.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Have a great day.
Welcome back, everybody. I want to say thanks again to Merrimack head coach Scott Borek. Great conversation with him. Great job, Pat. A lot of interesting stuff from him. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, before we get out of here, I want to give you the NESN schedule for this weekend one more time. It all starts Friday with Merrimack at UMass at 7 o'clock on NESN. Then Maine at Northeastern at 7 p.m. on NESN Plus. Saturday, Vermont at BU at 4 on NESN. Then Maine at Northeastern at 7 on NESN Plus. And we wrap up Sunday afternoon with Women's Hockey East, Maine at Northeastern at 2 p.m. on NESN. Okay, like we do every week before we get out of here, I just want to kind of highlight some games that that both of us are looking forward to this weekend. I'll start Maine, 2 games at Northeastern. I think it's a big statement opportunity for Maine once again. Also, kind of Northeastern's kind of been splitting a lot of series here for a bit. I want to see, can they show up and sweep one for a change against a quality opponent? But more so, I just want to see what Maine's going to bring to the table. This is an opportunity for them to really make a statement, get into the polls, and sort of just reaffirm to everybody that they are a legitimate threat in Hockey East. I like the Black Bears this weekend. I think we're going to see something big out of them. Also looking forward to Quinnipiac at Cornell. Quinnipiac, which started off the season in the top 10, considered one of the best programs in the country. They've fallen way out of the rankings. Well, not way out, but they've plummeted, and now they're out of the rankings, while Cornell is number 2 after beating Clarkson, a game that we talked about last week. So I just want to see, can Quinnipiac kind of figure their thing out, figure it all out and rise up and beat a really good team. We're going to find out. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering what's going on with Quinnipiac. So a big opportunity for them this weekend. And then finally, Michigan, 2 games at UNH. Michigan is only 3-7-2, so not that great this season. UNH coming off those 2 losses to Maine. So I just want to see, can the Wildcats rebound? And it
general, I care because I'm a UNH fan, and Michigan has really sweet helmets, and it'll just kind of be a fun game to look at. So I am looking forward to that one, and I will probably go to it, at least one of them, in person.
Love that. I'm excited for you.
Thank you,
That sounds like
Pat.
a big weekend. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, nothing better than watching Michigan UNH. Yes.
I'm
Big
excited
weekend.
for you.
Right.
For me, a game I was looking at was Providence versus Uconn. So Providence up to number 12 in the polls this week. They've had a good season so far at 6-4-2, but they're kind of up and down. They're coming off of a 7-3 loss versus Northeastern, but they also beat them 3-2, and then they beat BU the weekend before. So Providence, I think, is a team that is solid, but it's still kind of early in the season. You don't know exactly what to expect.
Right.
And then for UConn, on the other hand, UConn is sitting at 3-5-2, which isn't great, but they're coming off. This is their second weekend in a row. Fun fact that they have to face the number 12 seed, and they're coming off of, and with it being UMass Lowell last week. And last week they won 2-1 and they tied 3-3. So maybe they can keep that good times going this week. Another one that I was looking at was Western Michigan versus Denver. Denver, we've talked about them a lot on this podcast. Denver is a very good team. They're solid, but they're coming off of the series versus Minnesota Duluth, which obviously didn't go in their favor. And then now after the series against North Dakota, they lost 4-1 and then tied 1-1. So Denver, I think, is in a spot right now that once the season comes to a close, I think we both agree they're probably going to be fine. But
Right.
This is probably the biggest stretch of adversity this team's going to face this season. And so this weekend could be a weekend in which they can just go out there, get a bunch of goals, and just get right back on the right track and get ready for the next week.
But Western Michigan, number 20 in the country, is a
solid.
good team.
Absolutely.
So I think I agree with you that I think this is a good opportunity for Denver to get back on track, but also a great opportunity for Western Michigan to make a statement as well.
I agree. Either way, someone's going to rise, someone's going to fall in the polls after that, and I don't know what to expect out of it yet. And then the third series I was looking at, this is two more teams that we've spoken about at length on this podcast, is Ohio State and Penn State. It's going to be probably one of the better matchups you see this weekend. You got the number 6 Penn State, you got number 11 Ohio State. There's not much more you can ask for in college hockey. This could be a solid 2-game series, and I think, honestly, I would probably expect a split out of this. That's my prediction for this series.
I like it. Okay, good. We like predictions here. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm really interested in the Ohio State-Penn State games. Big Ten just keeps pumping out great series, great games,
Absolutely.
Great teams. So yeah, Big Ten hockey, awesome. Doing some big stuff. All right, we got to get out of here. You have anything else you want to add, Pat, or you just want to get out?
I'm about ready to get out and start hopefully doing some more research for next week. But I just want to one last time say thank you to Coach Scott Borek. It was a very insightful interview, I feel. It was interesting hearing his perspective because I know we've talked to teams here that have some pretty solid records, so it's interesting hearing the other side of it. But there sounds like there's hope, and I'm kind of rooting for him going forward.
Yeah, and again, I thought, it's very transparent, had a lot of great answers, went into great detail, and we appreciate that here.
Absolutely.
Thought it was a great interview. So yes, again, thank you to Merrimack head coach Scott Borek, and don't forget to watch his team take on UMass this weekend on NESN. And again, we want to thank all of you for listening to us again, and we will get back to you next week with another episode of the NESN College Hockey Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody.